Hi, I'm James, and this is my C2 speech, so I'm going to start now. It's just interpretation. That's what I thought. I first thought when I walked into the classroom at Sida University, taking an interpretation class. It should come as a second instinct to me. Come on, I'm bilingual. There should be no challenge at all. That's what I thought back in October last year. But boy, was I wrong. Right now, after 10 lessons of interpretation, I have much more respect for interpreters. There are many misconceptions about interpretation. First and foremost, interpretation. First and foremost, interpretation. People think that interpreters are only, as long as you're bilingual, you can be a good interpreter. But that is not the case. In fact, in the first class, the teacher told us that to be a good interpreter, there's a huge gap between a good interpreter and someone who gets paid for interpreting. And trust me, the gap is really big. Second point is that there's a misconception that interpreters only work 100 days a year and get paid 20,000 per session if you're really good at it. That might be true, but you have to consider the time and amount. You have to prepare for those sessions, and you also have to prepare for emergency cases just in case something happens. And the third misconception is that people think interpreters are only good at language, but actually they have to know a little bit of everything. That's why they are known as the jack of all trades, but the master of none. So what is the difference between translation and interpretation? Basically, interpretation is to convert one language into another orally, while translation is to do so in written form. So which one is harder, one may ask? I think interpretation is much harder because you have to do it right on the spot without the help of books, dictionaries, or any other people. But some people think that translation is harder because you have to be more precise with the wording and it leaves a permanent mark with your name on it. So, but I think both are pretty hard. So there are three types of interpretations. The first type of interpretation is called sight interpretation, where you have a script in front of you. You usually ask the speaker to give that to you beforehand, so you can just read and interpret. But sometimes, most of the cases, the speaker goes off topic, and so you have to prepare for these cases. The second type of interpretation is called consecutive interpretation. So where the speaker just stands here, and the interpreter stands beside it or next to it, or somewhere on the opposite side of the room, and then do the interpretation. So the speaker speaks for a few sentences or a few paragraphs, and then pauses for the interpreter to continue. In essence, you hear two languages side by side, and you can know right then, right there, that if the interpreter made a mistake. In these cases, it's good to have a notebook with you, because sometimes the interpreter, sometimes the speaker can go on for a long time and without pause, so you better be prepared with a notebook without relying on your memory too much. And the third type of interpretation is called simultaneous interpretation, where you see these at UN meetings, and you don't see these interpreters because they sit in the back in a little booth wearing a headset, and in order to hear them, you have to borrow a headset and then hear from through the headphone. Basically, they're isolated because they can't be distracted by other noises, and they need all the concentration in the world. So they just listen to the speaker and then keep on talking, and then without any pauses, you have to translate. So it's just listen, interpret, and translate with non-stop. I think this is the hardest because it takes years of practice, and you need to know the topic very well. And of course, you can't say any ahs or ums, because once you say that, it continues to the next sentence, and then you miss a sentence or so. Okay, and to be a good interpreter is much more than the language. Language is just kindergarten stuff. In fact, many of my classmates know more than 2 languages. They know some know Malaysian, Singaporean, Malaysian, Spanish, and Japanese. And you also have to have a good breadth of knowledge. You have to know a little bit of everything, and you better be prepared before you go on topic, because most of the time it is very difficult. For example, if you're doing an economic form, you better know marketing, finance, and business. And if you're doing government stuff, you should know international relationship and politics. And if you're doing military, you should study all the military terminologies. And of course, you have to be a very good speaker because you're not just interpreting, you're also their spokesperson in another language. You have to mimic their sound, their facial expression, their tone. So you have to, and then you have to be a very good listener. I think interpretation is a form of art because it takes years of practice to be good at it, and you know when an interpreter is good because you can tell it right off there. So the next time you see an interpreter, please show more respect and pay more attention because without them, some people won't even understand what they're saying, what the speaker is saying. And if you really want a high-paying and high-risk job, maybe you can take a few lessons like me and then try to become an interpreter. Thank you.